Story 1. I was shaking a bottle of ketchup in a busy restaurant, and the cap came off. The ketchup came flying out, covered about half of my face, and ran down my shirt into my shirt pocket. I always tighten caps first now before shaking. Story 2. When I was around 8 or 9, my family and I went to a bar and grill type restaurant for dinner. We sat in a booth, and as we got up to leave, I did not realize the tables were not bolted down. Short little me had used it as leverage to get down and essentially flipped the entire table, breaking and spilling everything on it. The guy who cleaned it up was very kind about it, and he said it happened all the time and I was the youngest and most sober person to do it. Core memory even 12 years later. Story 3. I confidently waved back at someone who was waving, only to realize they were waving at the person behind me. So I tried to play it cool and started doing stretches like that was totally what I intended to do all along. Story 4. Waiting for the bus to college in Scarborough back in the day, during wintertime. Chatting with a girl I liked somewhat. A friend comes along, laughing and pointing at a huge piece of mucus latched onto the end of my freezing cold nose that had been sitting there, crispy, the entire time. I was completely mortified. It was incredibly embarrassing in a public place. I haven't really topped that since. Story 5. I was in the mall walking along. I noticed a pretty girl watching me. I'm walking. She's still watching. I'm thinking we're connecting. I'm walking and I'm trying to be like, hey, and look cool. Then I walked right into a pole. Story 6. Once, I tripped over absolutely nothing while walking in a crowded mall and ended up doing an awkward dance to regain my balance. People definitely noticed, and I just had to laugh it off. Story 7. One time when I was a little kid, I ran into the bathroom frantically from holding it too long. I slipped on some person's urine and slid all the way under a stall where a guy was actively using the toilet. I hit my knee really hard on the toilet and ended up wetting myself. He was genuinely concerned if I was all right. Bless him, but it was so weird. Why did I share this? Story 8. Probably something I was doing while drunk out of my mind and acting like an imbecile back in my teenage years. Thankfully, I do not remember most of it. Story 9. In middle school, I walked through the middle of the cafeteria to use the restroom, and my brother's friends yelled something at me as I was leaving. I looked backward, hit a big round trash can pushed into a pillar, slipped, and dove halfway in. Everyone was inside the cafeteria, and I was one of the only people standing. I have a memory of the entire cafeteria laughing at me, but that could be just how it felt at the time. Story 10. I once went behind someone who was the same height, same coat, and same hair as my friend. So I walked behind, put my mouth right to his ear and said, "Hey, sweet cheeks," then stroked his hair. Story 11. I had an unfortunate incident at work. I worked for Xerox back in the day and had started taking medication for constipation. I thought it was just a regular occurrence, but it turned out to be something much more. It stained my pants and the office chair. I quickly switched the chair for someone else's, so someone unknowingly sat on it because we all shared desks in that office area. I didn't know how to tell my boss, so I simply said, "I have to go home. I can't explain right now, but I need to leave. I'll be back." I lived about 45 minutes away, so it wasn't a short drive. When I got home, I realized that all my pants were either dirty or in the wash, so I had to wait. Later, I received a call from my boss. He said, "You mentioned you were coming back." I replied, "I know, but I'm not." He asked, "What's wrong?" I responded, "I cannot tell you, but I'll be in tomorrow." The next day, after trying to come up with a plausible story, I finally decided to be honest. I met with my mail manager. I was a young 19-year-old girl at the time and said, "I can't even think of a lie to cover yesterday, so I'm going to tell you. I had an accident." His face and reaction were priceless. Story 12. One time I went to the gym and I wanted to walk on the treadmill with weights. I asked the lady if it was okay, and she said, "Sure, I don't see why not." So, I stood on the edges of the treadmill with my weights in hand, turned it up to 3.5 miles per hour, jumped on, and immediately slipped and hit my head on the treadmill screen. Then I kept running to play it off. Cancelled my membership soon after. Story 13. I needed to urinate desperately. There was no toilet in sight, so I went for the bushes. An old lady, for some reason, decided to follow me without me noticing. While I was watering the flora, she approached me from behind and asked me, completely ignoring my actions, where the next bus stop was. Her husband followed her, and we had a small talk with them, asking me questions while I held my private parts in my hands. For some reason, I was too paralyzed to put them back in. To this day, I'm not sure if they really noticed what I was doing there. Story 14. Flew from Denver to Chicago once. To preface, I had been there several times, and I was very much an adult at this time. I woke up from a nap looking out the window. I woke up and immediately saw Lake Michigan. I continued to just yell, "Holy smokes, is that the ocean?" Right when I woke up, my mom and I, and the random person next to us, laughed it off. I still chuckle about it sometimes. Story 15. When a white guy, was about 7 or 8, I heard the N-word for the first time. I had heard my older brother and some of his friends at school say it. I didn't know what it meant, and I just assumed it was a kind of generic schoolyard put-down or name you call someone, like "you're a dum-dum" or "you stink" or something. Fast forward to a few days later when I'm at soccer practice. We were doing a drill of some kind, and someone checked the ball away from me, so I said something along the lines of, "Give that ball back, you N-word." Well, my coach, a black guy, overheard me say this and was not impressed. He pulled me aside and asked me if I knew what that word meant. I told him I did not. So he immediately canceled the rest of our practice and sat down the whole team, all white kids except his son, and gave us a 30-minute lecture about where the N-word comes from, why we shouldn't say it, how we should be nice to our teammates, and so on. I was so humiliated and embarrassed about getting called out for that, although I totally deserved it. I did not mean to cause any real harm by saying it. I was just parroting words I had heard older kids use and thought it was cool because I looked up to them. Even to this day, 25 plus years later, I remember that incident and feel embarrassed about it. In retrospect, I admire the heck out of that coach for taking the time to teach us all to be more respectful. I got way more value from that lecture than I would have gotten from practicing soccer for a while. Story 16. I had to pee so bad. It was a side street and no cars were around. I peed in the garage, and as I was midstream, no lie, a van of 7 nuns pulled into it. I ran out. Story 17. Too many to name, but yesterday I blew straw paper at my date, and it went past her head and hit an elderly woman behind her, who proceeded to loudly exclaim, "God, Roger, do something," and sneezed thrice. She never found out it was me. Thank God. Story 18. My friend and her husband went to a restaurant, and she was a little tipsy. She went to the bathroom and tucked her dress into her pantyhose, and was not wearing any underwear, so she was bare when she walked out. She saw all these people she knew, so she stopped and spoke to everyone on the way back to her table. Her husband tried to tell her she was showing herself, but she thought he was saying that because she was overserved. Story 19. One time when I did not have a car, I had to ride my bike to work every day. Well, I could always ride without using my hands. There was something wrong with the alignment on the bike because the minute I took my hands off, I was trying to put my hair in a ponytail. The handlebars immediately just turned, and I fell smack dab on my face in front of about 100 people. I worked at Walmart, so there were a lot of witnesses. Also, another time I saw who I thought was my friend, and trying to be funny, I flipped him off, smiled real big, and said, "Hey, how's it going?" It was not my friend. Poor guy. Not to mention the many times I have tried to get in the wrong car because I was with someone who was driving and not used to their car, and I did not know what it looked like well enough to realize I was trying to get in the wrong one. Thankfully, they are locked. But one time, I used my key fob and it unlocked a Volkswagen that looked just like mine. So I got in and then looked around and realized, wait a minute, that really freaked me out. Then this was the worst. Also from when I worked at Walmart. I had a very old, filthy car. It was filthy when I inherited it. It had rained, and I knew I had left my window down. I looked outside, saw it was up, and thought that my husband must have been a sweetie and rolled it up for me before it rained. So I did not take a towel with me. I got in the car, sat down, and was soaking wet. Not a big deal. I would have a wet butt for a while. When I worked at Walmart, you had to wear khakis. Unbeknownst to me, when I sat in that wet spot, it did not just dry and disappear. My car was so old and gross that it left a giant rust/blood-colored stain, I am guessing from years of nicotine, on the back of my pants. I had been at work for about 2 hours by this time, looking like I had started my period and was just bleeding all over myself when finally a customer pointed it out. I was so embarrassed. I asked if I could run home and change, and they said no. I was literally crying with embarrassment while ringing everyone up. But the sweetest thing ever happened. A lady coming through my line saw me crying and asked why, and I told her. Without saying a thing, she went back and bought me a pair of pants to change into, so I did not look like a disgusting slob all night. That made me cry even more. What is messed up is if Walmart had found out she had done that, I would have been fired. Story 20. I fell asleep in a very small art house movie theater, think like 100 seats, and farted so loudly during a very quiet, tense, dramatic scene that they mentioned it in the online review the next day. Story 21. When I was 11 or 12, my aunt and I went to our closest big city to go shopping and ate at Applebee's for lunch. I ordered their cheese sticks. The restaurant was full. I proceeded to choke, truly choke, as I could not breathe at all, when the cheese lodged in my throat. My aunt was mortified and just stared at me, thinking she may have said, "Oh my God, everybody is looking at us," while I had to literally pull the cheese out of my throat. I have never eaten cheese sticks in public since. Story 22. Went to a work function at an arcade bar. My boss talked everyone into having shots after multiple pitchers of beer. I was almost blackout drunk on the bus ride home. Literally less than a mile from my stop, the spins hit like Thor's hammer. Not knowing what else to do, I stood by the door and vomited all over one side of the bus. The puke was sloshing back and forth on the floor with the last couple of turns to my stop. The worst part was that my wife had to help me after I fell getting off the bus. I don't get embarrassed easily, but I felt horrible for putting her in that situation. I don't drink much these days, and she likes it that way. Story 23. My 60th birthday was a few weeks ago. I went to Chipotle with my girlfriend and got a big chorizo burrito. We were laughing and joking around, and I tried to pass gas safely, but I ended up having an unfortunate accident. Never trust a fart after 30, folks. My day went from awesome to really unpleasant real fast, and my left sock had to be thrown out. Story 24. I had just gotten my license and took my father's Mustang convertible out for a spin. I stopped to talk to some friends and impress some girls with the car I was driving. When I went to leave, I tried to be cool and jumped into the car without opening the door. I hooked my foot on the door and face planted into the center console. Story 25. Once I tripped over nothing while walking in a crowded mall and made it worse by trying to play it off like I was jogging. I ended up making eye contact with a group of people who had clearly seen everything, and I just awkwardly speedwalked away. That day, I learned to just own the fall next time. Story 26. I have thrown up in public a few times. One time was in 7th grade at a big house party my friend's older brother threw. I still got called the barf master at the last reunion I went to 20 years later. Story 27. This was actually at work. It was towards the end of the day and I had to poop badly. I decided to pass gas right by the area where we put the mail and let out one of the stinkiest pre-poop farts of my life, not thinking anyone would walk by. Well, my administrative assistant walked by to drop off some mail and was like, "What does that smell?" "It smells like something died." Then my boss asked if it was me. I just denied it and they believed it was someone else. Story 28. Picking up a Yule log cake on Christmas Eve. As I was leaving the bakery, I noticed the person behind me had several boxes, so I turned to try and catch the door to hold it open for them. I slipped on some ice and went face down on the sidewalk. It knocked me out for a few seconds, not really sure how long, but it must have been brief against the outward swinging door. I woke up because the person inside was bumping the door on the side of my head while the giant crowd of customers inside stared. I will never show my face there again. Story 29. My shorts ripped in the middle of a workout at the gym. Thankfully, I was wearing boxers. A woman saw it happen and just yelled, "Oh, hell no," which, looking back on it now, was hilarious. Story 30. I was pretty young, and my mom and I were at the airport. When she was checking us in, I told her that I didn't feel well, and she said, "Just a minute." Well, I ended up vomiting all over the ground. I saw a woman later wheel her luggage through it since she wasn't looking. Story 31. I walked straight into a glass door thinking it was open. The loud thud was so bad people turned to look, and I just stood there for a second, pretending like it didn't hurt. Then, I casually walked away like nothing happened. Story 32. Let myself into the house after a boozy night out, desperate to get in bed and sleep, but was too drunk to make it upstairs and passed out in the stairwell. Woke up the next morning to my neighbor prodding me. Wondered why my neighbor was here. It wasn't my staircase I'd collapsed on. It was theirs. I'd let myself into their house. Story 33. At age 4, my mom taught me to be polite and excuse myself if something slipped out in public. We were at a crowded restaurant, and I farted, but no one heard it. Wanting my mom to be proud, I stood on the seat and yelled out for the whole place to hear, "Excuse me." I expelled gas.